Hi, everyone, and welcome to another installment of Coinbase Institutional Presents On the Record with me, John D'Agostino. We're here with Anand Iyer, a managing partner at Canonical Capital and a venture partner at Lightspeed Capital. Anand, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, you're a little bit unique in the venture world in that you are a true builder. You're a technologist. You built the technologies you're actually investing in. Mm-hmm. So where are we now? How good is it or bad is it to be a builder on blockchain today? And what are you looking for in builders when you invest?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Blockchains have matured so much. Just even a few years ago, we're battling so many things, so many demons, right? Does it scale? Does it work? Is it going to break? Are we going to be exposed to hacks? And, should I even be in the right jurisdiction to be building something in the world of crypto, right? Mm-hmm. And all those things have really sort of changed. Those headwinds have sort of turned into tailwinds. The technology is sort of commensurate being matured. And then you throw in the backdrop of AI, and we were just riffing on this a minute ago, which is, now you can code things you can sort of imagine things and perceive them, but put them into code so quickly thanks to vibe coding and tools like that. So I think it's opened up the aperture in multiple ways, right? There's people who couldn't code, can now code and build things very quickly, prototype them, like our children, or anyone else who wants to experiment. And then these systems have now matured to the point where you can just do absolutely insane things very quickly, very efficiently, and in a very verifiable way, which is what blockchains bring to the table.
So it's interesting. So I've heard some people say, older folks, they lament vibe coding because it's not true traditional coding. But it sounds like you think it complements versus detracts from or replaces traditional coding.
I really do believe so. In fact, every friend of mine who's a coder uses all these tools. So they don't, it's actually accelerated the work that they can do, right? So you can kind of zoom out from being a developer to being a little bit of an architect, where you have multiple sort of agents working for you and coding at the same time. Yeah. And what it's done is, and this is the kind of archetype that I was most excited about when vibe coding first became a thing, which is you have product managers who want to quickly prototype something and see if it works before they hand it off to the development team. They can do that very, very quickly now, right? So that's, invariably, I think you have, not to use, terms which, seem very topical and go around on Twitter all the time, but you have these like 3x, 4x developers who now become 10x developers because they can do so much more. Yeah. And then you have the 0 to 1. You have people who never coded before are like, I can try this out. And of course, it's going to be a little rough at the edges and things like that, but it's pretty cool that we can do that today.
But at least it's a rudimentary way for the non-technical person to start to speak the language and engage in the digital community.
100%. Yeah. It's really fascinating to see. And, the fact that, there used to be a bar, right? There's this learning curve. You had to learn how to code. You had to go through college and really understand this really well. And, there's a lot of math and physics still behind coding, which I think is essential for a lot of us to learn. But the learning curve has sort of dropped dramatically, right? The fact that our children can prototype things so quickly now. I mean, that's something how much time would I have had to spend to teach my daughter to learn how to code? And now she's getting taught how to code.
What'd your daughter create?
It's a bit of a long story, but my mother-in-law runs a very traditional UPS store, and she spends a lot of time scanning boxes like Amazon returns. And she's like, why does grandma have to stand and do this all day? Like, can I just build a barcode reader for her so that people can drop their box, they can scan it automatically and create a label? And I was like, I think we should build this. So we kind of built it in a matter of a few hours, and we tried it. And just, it works about 20-30% of the time, but it's kind of cool.
Your daughter's so selfless. My daughter created an app to more efficiently sweep the web for Christmas gifts.
I think it's smart.
Kudos to you.
Kudos to my wife, really, because I think my mind would have gone in the same direction, or have her look at how do we generate the most amount of yield for this stable coin that I have. But she's like, no, we got to help my grandma out. So so thanks my wife.
Anand, the promise of blockchain is always to some degree been about controlling and owning and maybe even monetizing one's own data. Coinbase recently announced X402, an open architecture model that allows agents and developers to get paid. Tell us a bit about why you're excited about that.
Yeah, this is one of the most fascinating developments that's happened in our industry in the last, maybe 6 to 9 months. To zoom out, we've had this very interesting primitive in the world of the internet, right? When the internet was first formed, which is Italy status codes. I hit a web page and something doesn't load for me, so I get a status code. If I hit a web page and errors out, I get a status code. What if I want to hit a web page and I need to pay to access that web page now? that status code's been there since the beginning of this protocol called HTTP. What Coinbase and some really smart folks have done is created a protocol whereby you can say, I want to access this content now, but I have to pay for it using crypto rails before I can access the content, which is brilliant. And again, as we were talking about earlier, now these blockchains have matured to the point where we can do things like this, right? So we can actually say, hey, by the way, this is gated, and we need to access this content, you need to microtransact.
Yep.
And for as long as the internet's been alive, and for as long as we've been transacting on the internet, we've gotten accustomed to certain business models, ads, for example, or the fact that anytime we need to swipe our credit card on the internet, it's a X percent, it's a 2 to 2.5% per swipe, plus 30 cents in fees, whatever that number is. Or we have net 30, we have invoicing and things like this. But what this does, and what X402 does, is it just opens up the landscape for just net new things to get built that we've never even conjured up before. It's like you said, I have a corpus of data that I'm very particular about. I only want to open up to certain agents that are going to be crawling my website. You have to pay me on a per transaction basis to access my content. So, and now imagine that's just my content. It could be another agent talking to another agent and things like this. And suddenly it's just like, it's things we haven't envisioned before. So it's like this 8 billion human market has now exploded into trillions of agents, which is just fascinating.
And if you think about the idea that, when agents start to work with agents on projects, the pace at which they'll move cannot be constricted by traditional financial rails. So it seems like the beginning of agent to agent, A to A data transactions, which would just unlock a tremendous amount of scaled intelligence.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and the fact that, this was, I remember a tweet from Brian Armstrong not that long ago where he's like, imagine agents that have wallets and the ability for them to transact, and they're not inhibited by how we think about corporations or finance the way we have thought about them, right? These entities can live on chain, breathe on chain, transact on chain. It just opens up the landscape, like you said. So the ability to coordinate among agents and perform quantum of work that is just phenomenal. It can do things while we sleep is the kind of future that we're heading towards, which is fascinating.
So on that point, a dear friend of mine is at MIT's AI lab, CCL lab. And he was telling me recently about work they're doing with pharmaceutical companies and drug development companies where if you think about a typical scientist who's sitting in a lab saying, okay, I think this chemical compound might treat this form of leukemia. And they'll do the research, they'll buy a data set, they'll test it, and they'll go through that process. Well, in theory, an AI agent could do that 1 billion times a day. And therefore, just the statistical probability of finding a cure just goes massively higher. Right. Now, the problem is it has to buy discrete data sets 1 billion times a day. Right? And that's obviously non-tenable in the current system. But imagine a world where you have an AI agent sitting at the data sales company, an AI agent acting as the equivalent of the scientist, where 1 billion times a day a microtransaction is occurring to allow that experiment to be done.
That's right.
That's when the ideals of superintelligence, I think, actually come true.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, it's you kind of compound this and you go, hey, by the way, maybe we're even constricted by the amount of data we have, right? Because that is also a problem, right? The fact that we have to sample so many humans and patients and with longevity studies to prove if certain things work or the way they don't. But now we talk about things like synthetic data, where we're creating this, combinatorial matrix of what's feasible, and then serving that data back to these agents to run experiments at scale, which is just phenomenal. So this is how we're kind of pushing the boundaries of what's possible here. So yeah, I think if we keep talking, we'll cure cancer.
Anand, let's talk about the intersection of blockchain and AI a little bit further. So as a venture firm, as a venture partner, where do you see that Venn diagram really being productive and really creating value?
Yeah. I focus a lot on infrastructure. So it's fairly deep down the stack where you have really smart founders who've got really interesting domain depth, building things that only they can solve. And it's just like you've done a lot of research to want to go build and solve problems here, right? So that's where we invest. That's where I primarily invest. That being said, we're now at that point in the cycle, including thanks to things like X402, where it's not just crypto developers building for other crypto developers, but it's financial institutions or as we were talking about earlier, maybe drug discovery folks or pharmaceuticals, what have you, are thinking about using rails that we've been building for a long time, but it's completely obfuscated for them, right? The fact that they can transact and get work done is a really interesting development. But I would say, where we are today, right? In terms of like concentric circles of adoption, the innermost circle is crypto developers building for the crypto developers, right? So we see AI agents doing things like being able to trade for you or generating yield for you and things like this, where previously we as humans would have to click a bunch of buttons and try to understand DeFi before we can transact on it. But we now have these agents doing a lot of that work for us, which is phenomenal because programmatically they can communicate with smart contracts better than we can. So that's a great unlock. But now the next sort of second order effect is applying that and increasing the market size for doing things outside of just the scope of crypto, where financial institutions get involved. And that's where, pay to play for data access, scraping websites, what have you. And that's immediate. That's kind of also happening now. And then we can only imagine how this starts to grow as more applications come into the frame. We're not confined by thinking about billing the same way that we've been thinking about it for the last 35 years. And so those are the inflection points that I'm starting to see now.
Looking ahead, I want to ask you two questions. I want you to give me what is your most ambitious vision for what blockchain can accomplish?
Yeah.
Something like stablecoins, for example. And then I want you to juxtapose it with what you think the most simple, almost pedantic problem will solve over that same, let's say a 5-year time frame. So let's start with this. In the next 5 years, what's your biggest possible vision for what this can accomplish?
Yeah. And this is, it comes back to this simple rubric for me, which is we don't have to, for so many years, we've been talking about humans using blockchains, right? That's been the bar for us. This TAM is 8 billion humans, whatever that, what the population of Earth is, right? But we shouldn't be constrained by that because we're going to have a number of agents working for us that will do all the work that we need to do while we're asleep or while we're awake, what have you. And those entities will transact on our behalf. And that is the most ambitious vision for me when it comes to blockchains.
Wow.
We are used to thinking about databases a certain way, but this is a distributed ledger that was custom built for programmatic interaction. When you put that as sort of like that, that's the lens through which we're going to look at what's feasible here. Yeah. Suddenly the aperture opens up pretty dramatically.
So Anand, that was the big vision.
Yeah.
Now tell me what's the smaller thing? What's the thing that is really kind of almost pedantic that'll just change our everyday lives in the short term?
Yeah, we're so used to thinking about payments in a very specific and constrained way. Now imagine for a second, we have a creator who wants to create a podcast, and we want to be able to compensate them for the amount of content we consume from them. And maybe it's not a monthly subscription, right? Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe per word, per sentence, per song, per paragraph, or something like that. And maybe certain pieces of content are priced more because it's a very popular artifact. Maybe some are priced less. That's the shift in landscape that we should start to come to terms with, which has really been hard to do before. So I know it's a very simple thing, but I think it just opens up the economy in a very fascinating way.
So I can sum up, we've got the big vision of scaled humanity and the smaller vision, but perhaps equally impactful, of composable payments.
Perfect. Very well said.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks.